If your landscape sketches often turn out something like this, you're not alone. It's tough to make landscapes look dynamic and interesting. And the way that I usually try to do this is by starting out with a perspective, with some grid lines and a perspective plane that I then add more detail to, and then add more shadow and light and distance and fading to as well. Drawing landscapes in perspective is really tough. It's tough to make the landscape look deep and inviting and three-dimensional. So today we're going to do a quick little landscape sketch to hopefully help you gain some groundwork and a new way of thinking about landscape drawing. What you want to think about is how when you're looking away at a landscape, objects on the ground appear to be a little bit flatter and a little bit closer together the farther they are away from you. We see that in every sort of perspective drawing, right? We've seen the way that we draw two lines, and as they reach the horizon, they appear to converge. The horizon line being the area at which all lines, when they're parallel, would appear to kind of dip over the horizon of the Earth. While we use perspective lines for drawing buildings to make sure that they look like they're going back to towards the horizon, we can use perspective guidelines for landscapes as well. So if I place my horizon line a little bit lower than the middle of the page, I can then add some of these guidelines to help me draw natural objects to make this scene, this landscape, appear three-dimensional and inviting. We have this, what appears to be a road going back to our vanishing point, but we can add these guidelines throughout the rest of the page as well. Let's add a couple more here on the left side of the page and the right side as well. And these can help us decide what objects we want to put in this landscape and how we're going to make them appear three-dimensional and receding towards the distance. This means that all the objects back here are going to appear smaller and all the objects up here are going to appear bigger. But as well, we want to make sure the objects farther away from us appear lighter or less distinct, and the objects closer to us appear heavier, darker, and more detailed. We also want to make sure that objects like grass or trees appear closer together the farther they are away from us, because from our vantage point, we're able to see less distance between these individual objects. If we start by adding in a little bit of trees on the background here, I'm adding some trees really, really lightly with a pencil, just a little silhouette of the top of the tree line. And then we can add another tree with a little trunk that falls right on the edge of that diagonal line here. Now, we don't want the trees to all be in a line because nature doesn't work that way, but what we can do is draw it on another line that still leads towards that vanishing point. I can add another tree right here. This tree is a little bit bigger. I want it to be around the same height, so it's going to be coming up to the page at the same height as the tree to the right of it. And then let's draw a tree with a bigger canopy. And now this tree is going to go down a little bit farther. You can see that these trees are around the same height because they all come up to the same part of our drawing. However, the trunks appear longer because this one is closer to us and this one's farther apart. If I wanted to draw a very tall tree that was clearly taller than the trees behind it, I can make it extend up into the sky a little bit. Its bottom would be hidden by the trees in front of it. We can use this method to really flesh out an entire forest, right? If we add a nice big canopy, we can then decide how far down this tree is going to extend into our scene, drawing trees of different heights. That means when we draw much smaller trees, we can then play around with the scale of these as well, guiding the height and the size of these smaller trees off the trees around it. And remember, in landscapes, even though we're thinking about perspective, we also want to think about realism and how we perceive these objects as well. And that means you shouldn't be afraid of layering objects over top of one another. If this forest was made up of trees that were just evenly spaced, it wouldn't look that realistic. Likewise, the forest needs to be made up of trees that are different sizes, right? Different sizes, different shapes, with trunks that might go down in different ways. However, it's important to keep in mind how layering works in the scene. What I mean by this is this tree is clearly behind the tree in front of it. That's because this foliage is disappearing behind the foliage of this tree here. As well, right now it appears a little bit farther away. That means we need to be careful that we don't extend this this tree trunk all the way down below this tree trunk, or else we have a perspective conundrum or perspective problem. When trees are behind the tree in front of it, this tree appears farther away from us, and that means the trunk needs to appear shorter as well. We can draw some trees that are closer to us on this side of the page. I'm creating a little evergreen tree, and what I always tell students when we're doing perspective drawing or landscape drawing is to make sure your objects are messy. We want our trees to be a little bit uneven. We don't want any cookie cutter trees here. We're going to extend this tree down into our scene. It's getting slightly bigger as it comes down, and it's also going to be pretty close to the viewer, so it can be nice and beefy, kind of coming down into our scene here. We want to add some trees behind it. And so again, part of the trees behind are going to be obscured by the tree in front. We can continue this method kind of going back towards the vantage point, with each tree getting a little bit more faded out. Now, you can add more detail or texture to these trees, but for the point of this lesson, I'm just focusing on the overall silhouette of the trees and the overall feel of our landscape sketch. Different trees have different silhouettes, and so it can be really important too to have a reference photo in front of you to know, what kind of foliage you're going to draw, or how you're going to adjust the size of the tree or the branches to really reflect the type of tree you want to draw. As you can tell, these trees that are closer towards us, I'm adding a little bit more detail into the branches, into the silhouette of each tree. Now, this tree I've just drawn here has a trunk that recedes down into our landscape farther than the trunk behind it. That means we need to draw the canopy in front of this tree. We can add some tree trunks behind these two trees that appear like they're a little bit hidden. And you can see that we are gradually developing a forest. We want to make sure that the trend line of the heights of these trees gradually decreases. So it's a gradual line back towards the horizon line. That doesn't mean we can't draw some taller trees back in the distance. It just means the overall average height of the trees we're drawing is going to get smaller because they get farther away from us and become, in our eyes, smaller and closer together and less distinct. So to recap, how we've been drawing this forest is by generally aligning the trunks with lines that recede out from the vanishing point, which is right here in the middle of our page. By layering the trees, drawing a canopy that's in front of a canopy or a evergreen tree behind it, we're effectively making trees appear like they're closer towards us, more detailed and larger when they are closer towards us. We can add taller trees by making the tops of them pop out a little bit above the general line of the trees we've drawn. However, most of the trees we want to be getting gradually smaller in a kind of that triangle shape towards the vanishing point. The trees that are closer to us, we want to add more detail on, adding some shading, some light, and some more texture to really emphasize that they are closer. And the things that are closest to us are things that we see with a little bit more detail, a little bit more precision. If we want to add other objects that really complement the scene, what if we talk about adding some mountains or hills behind us here? And we can really follow the lines that we've drawn here to the left. We want to make sure these lines go up, appearing to get larger the closer they are to us. But we want to add some mountain peaks, so we're going to go up and then go down a little bit, creating a little hill right there. But then we want that hill to be layered behind a hill that's closer to us. So then, starting from the horizon line, I'm continuing a line left up the page that's going a little bit higher than that first little mountain peak. It's going to come down a little bit more here. And then let's draw another line that comes down and goes even higher still. You'll see how we've used this trend line, this line that goes back towards the vanishing point, as a general guide for how we draw these mountains in the background, making them appear larger closest to us, but also making them appear a little bit more organic. We don't want straight up and down lines, but by layering these mountains one on top of the other, we've effectively created a background that looks like it's a little bit more dynamic than a flat background. It's the mountains coming towards us, the viewer. We can do the same thing here on the right-hand side, making sure we don't mirror the mountains exactly, but they're coming up towards us. Now you can see if I draw the mountains in a straight line, they're on the same plane. So the mountains in the very, very background are almost flat if you kind of take the average height of them. And to me, they appear like they are kind of in the same level, whereas the mountains on the right-hand side and the left-hand side appear like they're getting closer towards us, the viewer. We can do the same thing with a river that might come out towards the viewer. So if we draw some guidelines here, I'm drawing a triangle that goes back towards the page, and another one here, and another one here. We have these three triangles, and that's because we want to make this river curve a little bit. Very rarely is a natural river or creek straight, but it's hard to draw this in perspective. What we can do is take one of these triangles and then draw a curved line back towards us. And connecting here. Now it's a little bit of a hard thing to describe, but basically you can see how I've chosen points on these different triangles. Drawing lines that go back and then kind of connecting to another point on the other triangle and using these as a guideline. So when the lines kind of connect up to each of these triangles, that's when it's kind of receding away or coming towards us. We can then kind of soften how this curve of the river appears. As it kind of comes towards us, the viewer. And then let's add some other elements to kind of really flesh out this pencil drawing. And again, this is a very rough pencil sketch, but we're just trying to get the overall sense of perspective in landscapes and some rudimentary concepts that you can then use in more finished drawings as well. Drawing these more angular shape here, we're drawing a little rock. We don't need to draw the base of it. We can then just add some grass on a slant downwards, and you can see how this suggests that we're kind of slanting downwards towards the river. Drawing the grass that gets a little bit taller, a little bit more distinct as it kind of comes towards us. And using the grass to kind of overlap parts of the river can be a really effective method of adding some interest and making the scene appear a little bit more three-dimensional as well. We've talked about how objects get smaller and less distinct as they go back towards the horizon line. And that's really important with all elements of your scene. And so the grass that gets back here farther is going to become less and less distinct. And the grass that's up here is going to be a little bit more distinct. You can see how trying to keep these shapes really lyrical, light, and loose is really key method of making this drawing feel a little bit more alive. You can see when doing a more completed pen drawing, I keep this method in mind no matter what I'm drawing. This one has limited trees, but this ongoing in progress drawing that I'm working on has more detail here at the beginning of this foliage and then fades out with a little bit less detail, less distinct levels of detail back here. While this drawing is a different sort of project than the one we're working on here, the same concepts really directly apply. Once you have the bones of your landscape drawing in perspective, it's then about adding shading and detail. And just like we talked about with distance and darkness of line, this same concept really applies to this part of the class too, of adding shading and detail in a way that befits how close or far the object is from the viewer. Once we decide where the sun is coming from, perhaps the left-hand side of the page, we can then add some shadows that really tell us more about the scene that we're drawing. This tree would be partly in shadow and have shadows kind of underneath it here. And you'd see how that concept applies as we go up into the distance here. I think one thing that separates really beginner art from more, higher level or advanced art is the willingness to be a little bit messy, but then choosing where you choose to be messy. If the overall perspective lines look good and the overall composition looks good, we can be a little bit more messy with the details and how we add shading to our drawing. However, if the perspective lines are off, or if the drawing, looks a little bit weird perspective-wise or depth-wise, then it's a little bit harder to create a convincing landscape. Being willing to fade out the objects, I think that's really a critical part of the finishing off part of your drawing. You want the trees and the things that you're drawing closest to you to be the most detailed, most distinct. You also want to be willing to fade off the drawing or create some nice framing elements. You don't want to add the most detailed parts of your drawing to the left or to the right hand side, but instead you want to focus attention right on that central area of your landscape. You can add some lines kind of coming down the river, showing some motion and detail there. And then why not some more distinct kind of elements here close to us, some little bulbs or shrubbery things. I'm not a horticulturalist. And we can add some more rocks here, coloring the bottom of them in as well. Now again, this is a very rudimentary sketch. We haven't added much detail, we haven't added much shadow or light, but we have kind of talked about the groundwork for creating great landscape sketches and keeping horizon line and perspective in mind. It's these tips that I hope you can take on into the rest of your drawing practice. Refine, take what you need, leave the advice that you don't need, and create your own rules as well. But all in all, hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. If you liked it, consider following along and leaving a like, and stay tuned for more drawing updates. It's been a pleasure to draw and sketch with you today.